Hey guys, what's going on? Ewen Crosby here with another edition of Send Me Your RAWS, and in this video I'm going to take these two photos and combine them into this. Stick around and let's do it. Hey guys, thanks again for joining me for another edition of Send Me Your RAWS, and in this episode I'm going to take a couple Milky Way photos, one taken without people in it and another taken with people in it, and we'll combine the two into a single shot that looks seamless. I'm also going to provide some tips on how to better shoot this in the future if you have been trying to shoot this, and how you might improve your in-field techniques to better capture so that you can have better edits in the long run. So let's take a look in Lightroom here. So if we take a look, we have two photos here from my buddy Joey Quirk, and one taken with three guys in it and another taken without them in it. I assume that the shots here are taken one after another. Yeah, so this one was taken 10 minutes prior. And so one thing I'm going to mention about this right away is, if you're going to do this type of photo, make sure that the distance between your two shots is minimal so that any movement in the stars or the Milky Way doesn't come out. The big problem that we have with this photo is that if we want to capture these blue lights and put that onto this photo, we're going to end up masking in some of the lighter areas and blending those in, and we don't want to blend the Milky Way. So in your shots, make sure that your light isn't necessarily sticking into the Milky Way if you're going to be combining different exposures. In this shot without anybody in it, we have an exposure of 6400, 24mm, and 20 seconds. I'm going to mention that this shot at 20 seconds is going to have some streaking in it from trailing because it was taken at a little bit too long of an exposure. This shot should have been taken at 15 seconds or less, and more like 10 or 8 if possible, to get a much cleaner shot and no star movement. The other shot with the gentleman in it was taken at a less time of an exposure at 8 seconds, same settings, 6400, 24mm, 2.8. In the future, I'd recommend not changing your exposure time, as you might just adjust the ISO. And in turn, if you thought that you were blowing things out too much by having a long exposure, then what I would recommend is turning your ISO down during your shots with the guys in it, and then they won't blow out as much and you'll probably have cleaner light. So instead of doing 8 seconds, you could have done 3200 or maybe even 2400, something like that, with your ISO for the shot with the gentleman in it. Okay, so how do we blend these? First and foremost, what I'm going to do is just set up some basic things before we blend them together. I'm going to turn on chromatic aberration, profile correction, and then I'm going to go in and do some noise reduction and sharpening. So I'm going to turn all these off first, and let's look at the color noise up here in the sky. What I'm going to do is just slide the color noise slider over. Oops, wrong button there, hitting the Windows button. The Alt button is what you want to hold if you're going to get an alternative view, but unfortunately you don't get that here. With the color slider. So right about there at about 10 or 11, we start to lose all that color noise, and that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and just sharpen the image here and probably add quite a bit of sharpening, somewhere in the 40 to 45 range. Turn down my radius. I'm going to turn up the detail a little. No, I'm actually going to turn down the let's turn up the detail a little bit. And then I'm going to mask out majority of the dark portions of the sky so that I'm really only sharpening the stars. Somewhere in this range looks pretty good. Okay, actually, while we're in there, let's add a little bit of luminance noise. Typically to my Milky Way photos, I do not add any luminance noise reduction, but in this photo, with it just being a single exposure, I think it's necessary to help out some of that noise. So once that's done, I'm going to sync these. Actually, to make sure that the white balance is synced, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to mess with the white balance on this one real fast. Looks like it's a little warm and a little bit... Well, let's go ahead and cool it just a hair, something like that. And let's play with the magenta and green a little bit. I think it's just a little bit too magenta, somewhere in this range. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and click in and go back and forth here. I think right about in this range is probably more color correct. So we'll go ahead and just leave that there. I'm going to double click those off. And let's go ahead and sync these two files. And before we bring them together in Photoshop, we're going to raise up the exposure on this one by a stop, because he underexposed this a stop by going from 20 to 8 seconds, about half of an exposure. So we'll just bring it back up to where it was, so that these are kind of equal in exposure somewhat. And actually, we could probably brighten this one up, maybe even just a little bit more. I'm going to try and get them as equal as possible. This one's now a little bit too bright. 1.2 looks good. Okay, so let's open these up as smart objects. And the reason why we're going to do it as a smart object instead of just layers, in case I want to come back and adjust these for any reason in Camera Raw, I can do that as when they're as smart objects. So if you open up as smart objects, they're going to open up as two different files, and to get them on the same file, we're going to go ahead and use the move tool, hold Control and Shift, drag this file up onto the other tab, then drag down, release the click, and continue to hold Control and Shift to place in place, and then they're back on top of each other in perfect placement. Okay, so I'm going to put the I'm going to call this the guys layer. Put that on top, and we're going to call this the main, because that's the main layer. So first and foremost, what I'm going to do is turn off the top layer and just mask out the ground so that our foreground kind of comes in like you see here with these guys in it, and then we're going to maintain the sky. So I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to grab my main layer, grab my quick selection tool, and just mask out the ground here. See how well it does. It probably could be improved in some areas, so I'm just going to go ahead and do select and mask, and we're going to go in here and just kind of mask out some of this stuff. It's really noisy here, and I don't really necessarily like what it's doing completely on a lot of these edges. I might just go ahead and just do a couple of the dips in here and really not mess with too much. It's probably too noisy here for us to get a really good mask on the edges here, and I just want to be careful not to blend too much into the sky. Okay, that looks pretty good overall. See, this area is you got a little red going into the sky, and I don't necessarily like that, but for the sake of this video, that's good enough. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to add this selection as a mask to the top layer, and now we should have a portion of our guys here. And there we go, as we turn this on and off. Very good. So how do we add these guys back in and then the light? Let's do that. The next step is to add these guys in. We're going to shift click the mask to hide the mask. I'm going to grab our lasso tool, and I'm going to start by just going around the edges of these guys. I think I'll do one guy with you, and we'll show you one example, and then I'll speed through the rest. And I'm not too worried about being completely exact at this point, although if this was a museum piece and something I was very eager to get perfect, I would take my time doing this mask here. Okay, gonna get the headlamp up here and then go around, and you can see my mask isn't exactly perfect, but if it's not, the exposure should be close enough between these photos that the mask shouldn't be super important, and you shouldn't see any edging, too much edging. Oop, I released my click there, and that was a mistake. Let me go back. There we go. And I'm just going to continue to draw around him. And we'll go down here into the foreground and then across, and just make sure that we have all the foreground covered there. And let's zoom out and make sure he's selected pretty good. And then what we can do is unhide the mask by clicking on it. And if your foreground color is white and black, you can hold down Alt and Backspace and go ahead and fill that with white. And now you can see where we're going. So we also have to add in the light, but we'll do that after this. What I'm going to do is speed through these next guys, and then you can catch up with me later. So one thing I forgot to mention is if you do have any armholes here, you're going to want to go in and select these. Oops, I forgot to select both. Holding Shift, I'm going to add the selection here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make sure our mask is selected. We're going to go ahead and hit delete there. And that way the Milky Way background is coming through their armholes. You'd want to do that if you had any difference in exposure for sure. If we hadn't equalized these exposures, that'd be very important. Okay, let's back into fast forward mode. Okay, now that you're done with your masking, you should have something that looks something like this, and it's going to be able to be turned on and off with your guys and whoever you're painting into your foreground. Now what we need to do is add the blue lights. To do the blue lights, I'm going to turn off the mask here and show what it would look like if it was just these guys. So I want to capture the blue lights, and I'm going to create luminosity masks on this image. So I'm going to create the masks, and by the way, if you're interested in learning more about luminosity masks, I've got tutorials on my website about Photoshop, use of luminosity masks, as well as there's a blog on my website with a YouTube video which talks about luminosity masks, their creation, and includes this free action that you saw that I just created. So I'm going to create this mask here where I have a selection of the blue light but not much of the background black color, and what I'm going to do is first I'm going to deselect that. I'm going to duplicate this layer so we have a copy. There we go. And I'm going to paint on this mask using the selection we made. So I'm going to reselect. I'm going to hide that selection. Choose a brush. 100% a soft brush is fine. 0 hardness. But opacity to 100% is fine for this because the mask is going to be very light. And what I'm going to do is actually make it about this size. And I'm just going to slowly start brushing up and adding in the blue lights here. Now you notice that we're not painting in anything else, because we've chosen that luminosity mask, and now we're only painting in the stars and the blue light, and we're not really painting in the background blacks here. Now we are actually we might be getting a little bit. I can see some addition of some of the black darkness of the other layer. So what I'm going to do is just kind of increase the blue here. I don't want to go too far up because we will have another portion of the Milky Way. So for example, if I turn this off, the Milky Way is actually right there. And if we turn it on, so we want to be careful not to go too much higher than here. I'm just going to let these blue lights kind of flood in there. Now, if there are some pixels coming through that are dark, what we could do is come back and choose our dark layer here. Maybe something like that. Select this, come in here, and I'm going to paint with black now over our lights. So I'm just going to paint in the black color here. The color black, and just kind of take away some of that darkness. So now we can turn it on and off. You can see we're adding stars, and they sort of look duplicated. So what we might do is come in here with the color black. Let's deselect and just paint out some of these stars that look obviously duplicated here. Okay, that looks pretty good. And maybe just paint out a little bit of the edges around here. If you really wanted to, you could get a big brush here and just kind of really feather the lights back a little bit. Something like that. Okay, so we can turn that layer on and off, and you can see the difference back and forth. So the addition of the stars isn't really a bad thing. I think that overall, you know, you're going to end up with some movement there in terms of stars, but it's worth it in the long run, I think, to accomplish the goal. Now, again, if you wanted to have this work a little bit better, you might just try to do a stacked exposure with guys standing there for a few minutes. And maybe not white lights, but red lights instead of white lights would be a better call. Be a little bit softer and a little bit better exposed, and you can continue exposed at the same exposures of your star shots in turn. If you guys are interested in learning more about infield techniques and how to capture Milky Way photos, you can check out my workshops at www.chrisewencrosby.com. I also have editing tutorials and many other resources out there to help you improve your photography. If you're interested in having your photos edited on this show as well, you can go ahead and send them out to chrisewencrosby.com/raw, where you can upload them or send them via email so that I can edit them here on the show. Thanks again to Joey Quirk at Joey Quirk on Instagram for sending this photo over to me. He's a great buddy. It allowed me to borrow one of my cameras as a loaner without any real obligations when my camera was out last year. So big thanks to him. He's a great guy, and be sure to check him out. You can check out his Instagram handle at the bottom of this, or in this description at the bottom of the video. Okay, until next time, this was Chris Ewen Crosby with Send Me Your RAWS. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit about blending your Milky Ways and how you might improve your shots in the field as well as editing. Till next time, see you then.